Hi, welcome back to our podcast, Love, Growth, and Narratives. I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Freddie.
And I first want to start out by thanking everyone for following us on the different platforms. We really appreciate it. And the feedback that we've gotten, especially on my social media, different people have messaged me and people have messaged me, text messaged me. We really appreciate that. If you can continue to give that feedback actually on the platforms with a 5-star rating, that will really help us out. When you're on Spotify and as well as Amazon Podcasts, that's where you can follow us. Some of you may follow us on Amazon Music, but we noticed that most people are on Spotify and the Amazon Podcast.
And Apple.
Apple Podcasts, sorry. Sorry, getting this all down. Thank you so much for continuing to listen over the week whenever you can, on those long rides, on your workout, on your walk, just before bed, anytime that you can find to squeeze in and take a listen and give us some feedback.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, especially the feedback, because we want to make sure that we're going in the right direction, that people can understand what we're trying to do. So all of that feedback is really critical to us.
Yeah. This week on episode 4, we're going to talk about narratives in the Love, Growth, and Narrative title. And Freddie is going to explain a bit about in-group cognitive bias.
The in-group cognitive bias, is really important to discuss, because as we get into the podcast over the coming episodes, especially the episodes where we talk about narratives, a central theme of it is the in-group, out-group dynamic. And it is a cognitive bias, and it's something that, it's rather primal for humans, being social animals, is that we have a need to belong to a family, to a community, to a group of people who share the same ideals. One of the most popular in-group, out-group type of examples would be Democrats and Republicans. As some people, the way they grew up, the neighborhood they grew up, the people that they grew up, they kind of adopted, a party, be it Democrat or Republican. And what they end up doing is you end up giving a break to those within the party that you like when they do something wrong, but those in the opposite party, they get no grace. And so you'll see, like, especially if any of you watched the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, how the analysis afterwards went from, if you're a Democrat, you'd say, well, Joe Biden had a bad performance, and he also had a cold, which probably contributed to him having a bad performance. However, that guy over there, Donald Trump, he's an existential threat, and he's a liar, and we have to get rid of him. Now, if you're on the Republican side, your thought process will probably be the opposite. You'll say, well, we know what Donald Trump can do, what he did when he was in office. And even though we may not like some of the stuff he says, the things that he did in office, we approve of, as opposed to with Biden, where we just think that he's asleep at the switch. And we need to really get rid of him, because who knows who's actually running the country. And so when you look at these in-group, out-group dynamics, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Okay, so let me just be clear. In my mind, what you're saying is that it's basically these teams, these camps, these groups, whatever you want to
tribes.
No disrespect to Native Americans. That you tend to fall into one particular group, and you feel a sense of belonging when you're in that group, and you feel dedicated to that group.
Yes.
And when something happens within that group, you tend to make excuses for it, especially if you're talking to someone on the other side.
Absolutely.
You may notice, you may feel that something was wrong, but you don't want to appear like you're putting down the group that you support.
Yes.
Right. And the group on the outside is going to do the same thing on the opposite. And what we're kind of asking people to do today, and something that I'm requiring of myself because I'm working on this, I'm new at this, is to be more of a critical thinker and really think about what information I'm evaluating and be able to say what I agree with and what I don't agree with. And whatever that statement is, it doesn't mean that suddenly I'm against my own team or that I'm for the other team, but that I'm just evaluating that particular piece of information to better analyze things.
Yeah, and I think that's important, especially when you're in conversations. And that's why, for me, I try to admit during conversations where people don't necessarily agree with me, I try to admit my own biases, because of the fact that I don't want to fall into that trap of, well, this guy was on my side or was on my team or in my tribe. And so, or, I'm going to excuse everything they do, or this person, they're in the other tribe, so everything they do, it has to be horrible. And so I think, first off, admitting to yourself that you have these biases, and at an elemental level, they're not bad to have a group that you care about and a group that you want to do well. Where it gets difficult is how much of a pass you give to your side, as well as how you vilify the other side, especially sometimes when the other side, they're just people just like that. Where else have you seen that?
I've seen it, and I think we're going to discuss this tonight in the Black community.
Absolutely.
Where me personally, I grew up not feeling, in my younger years, I'm going to say 0 to good 15, 20, I didn't feel accepted by my own group, quote unquote, Black people, because of the way that I spoke or the way I carried myself or even my skin color. And I myself didn't want to be a part of that group for a long time, but I had no choice, right? So I was associating everything with something being negative as a part of that group because of the way that I showed up as a Black person wasn't considered Black enough.
Yes.
And so I went with that for a long time. It created for me some stereotypes against my own group, making them larger than life. And it caused me to have certain friendships, which is it's nothing wrong with having friends with all different backgrounds. I love my friends to death, but I do also feel that I pushed myself away from my own group because I was scared to talk and be teased because of the way that I spoke. Even when I taught 6th grade, the students told me that I talked white, and I had a really hard time with that. That I'm getting it from kids, I'm getting it from adults, I'm getting it from peers. That was the only way I knew to talk, and everyone in my family spoke, and everyone on my Black neighborhood street in New York spoke that same way. So it wasn't until I stepped outside of that that I was seen as being bougie. I think I've been called bougie many, many times in life when I was young. And at that time, it meant more like you think you're better than other Black people. Yes. Now it's kind of like a badge of honor. Yeah, I'm bougie. I like fine dining and luxury and all of that. But growing up, it was, you think you're better. Yeah.
I think for me, I was proud to be Black, my whole life. However, I did have a lot of difficulties. There were times where I lived in a majority white suburb just south of Pittsburgh. And from there, we ended up moving to Maryland into a more diverse area where you had, a hodgepodge of everyone. And when you're seeking out your group, I wanted to be around more Black people, but then Black people say, well, this is how you have to talk. This is how you have to act. Coming from a majority white suburb of Pittsburgh, coming down to Maryland, the way I talked was definitely different. the music I listen to. I listened to hip hop music when I lived in Pittsburgh. However, I also had an affinity for heavy metal. I enjoyed some AC/DC. You know, there were other white artists that I enjoyed. I'm still a big fan of Billy Joel, and I don't care who knows it. You know? But when I would play a lot of those artists amongst my friends, now it's like you're a sellout. You know, why would you even listen to that? That's not music. And how you talk. And so one of the problems with the in-group piece of that is you have people who feel like they have decided on the dogma or the required way of being if you're within this group. So if you're going to be Black, here's how you walk, here's how you talk, here's how you act, and here's how you think about things in the world. You must think the same way that we have decided is appropriate for Black people. And I've always had difficulty with that.
Yeah. I want to interject for a second for everyone listening out there. I am not saying at any point, because I get into these conversations with random people, we don't represent all Black people. No Black person represents all Black people. There are some collective things that we can say at times, but we are not saying every Black person expects every other Black person to speak a certain way, or every non-Black person there are no, absolutes. We understand that there's variations and variables for everything. We're just talking from our personal experiences, and some people may share the same experience. I not only did I get how I was supposed to speak and show up as a Black person from Black people, I also got that from non-Black people.
Yes.
So over the course of my life, I would hear people say things like, I don't even think of you as Black. Or I remember when I worked in the clothing business, and I would speak to a lot of the clients over the phone. And one time I had to fly into New York and visit them in person. And the first thing they said was, first of all, their eyes like bulged open and they couldn't believe that I was a Black person. I thought you were blonde eyed, blue hair, or whatever, blue hair, blonde eyed. Yeah. And I was like, no, you know what I mean? Like, it never occurred to me what she may or may have not have looked like.
Yeah.
And the fact that she was thinking about that and so incredibly disappointed when I wasn't. And from that point on, our relationship was different, even though we had only spoken on the phone for years.
Yeah. So
she knew me, we joked, she sent gifts, and it immediately stopped.
Yeah.
When I wasn't in the group she thought I should be in. So she, basically that's saying, as a Black person, you don't think I'm supposed to be speaking this way.
Right.
And I'm throwing you off, by not speaking the way you think told you who I was. That's been hard, and I'm thinking to myself, do I change the way that I speak this? I don't know any other way. I'm not doing it on purpose, and in fact, my friends are from all different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. So when people assume that I hang out with just one particular group, it's wrong. Like, I have so many different friends from all different backgrounds, and that expectation of how I am supposed to be as a Black woman, it's difficult. I couldn't meet it. So for a long time, I didn't know myself. I didn't allow myself to show up the way that I could, because I'm like, I don't fit in this group. I don't fit in that group. I'm just going to be in my own little group over here, in my own little world, my own little introverted world. I really think it's important for us to allow people to show up in many different ways, whether it's racial or even gender-wise. But I can say that I can be a part of that as well, that I would judge certain Black people based off of the things that they said. Like, a particular person who is popular for supporting some of the Republican ideas, some of them, right? Not all of them, that, who is Black and female. And, I'd be like, oh my God, I don't want to hear her. What is she saying? She doesn't represent me, and like, she doesn't represent us, and who is she, and all these kind of names. And I'm realizing how I can't do that.
Yeah.
I have to, I don't have to agree with her.
Yeah.
And I don't. It doesn't mean that she never says anything that is worth listening to and taking in. But I myself, even though I was treated poorly with the in and out group thing, I do it too.
Yes.
It's kind of the way where society raises us to.
Yes. Yeah, and I have been that way in the past as well. But I think that I want to circle back to one thing that you had said in terms of the average person, because growing up, the average kid didn't tell me that there was anything wrong with what I was doing. The problem is that the folks that try to enforce these, for lack of a better term, purity tests of their in-group are just the loudest. And so it's not that every kid back then was telling me this. It's just that the ones that were happened to yell the loudest and all of those different types of things. And so it really makes it difficult. But what I started doing many years ago, because I enjoy talking to people who I would normally disagree with. And so I seek out the other groups and try to understand. And the more you do that, the more you see we're just people. Oftentimes, even if you go outside of the racial situation, it could be East Coast and West Coast. It could be, just any manner of sports teams. And, living in the DC area, I used to, at least a few times a year, go to Washington Redskins game. I know they're not the Redskins anymore, but I used to go to Washington Redskin games. But my best friend is from Philadelphia. And there's no way that he could go with me wearing a Philadelphia Eagles jersey. I mean, he may not make it out of there alive.
Right.
Now, are people in Philadelphia different from people in DC? I really don't think so. But because one has the burgundy and gold and the other one has the green and white, it's just something that simple, and that to me is just ridiculous. And I think that as critical thinkers, as you were saying, we owe it to ourselves to challenge our own biases. And we do this, Tiffany and I do this so much during our conversations, because she knows my biases and she lets me know, okay, well, that's kind of your bias talking. And that gives me the chance to kind of step back and really evaluate my own thought process and make sure that I'm giving enough credit to the other side and not giving credit to my side that it doesn't deserve.
Right,
So,
right, absolutely. Like another example that is not, it's not racial, but that I can think of is growing up, I was a hardcore Prince fan, right? Hardcore, right? And so it was Prince versus Michael, and once in a while, El DeBarge would get thrown in there. But it was Prince versus Michael, right? And so I felt like I cannot have, a magazine that has Michael on it, or I can't have a poster on my wall that has Michael on it. I have to be all about Prince. I have to be dedicated to Prince. And if I like Michael, then I'm cheating, And so I never, what was interesting when as I became an adult and Michael passed away, I regretted not ever going to see him in concert. And while I've seen Prince 10 times, even visited Paisley Park. So I was like, what? That was ridiculous to me, that dedicated to someone who doesn't even know me, that I couldn't even acknowledge another great artist.
Yes.
They're different and that's okay, but they're both amazing artists. And I regret that I stayed so tight to that team in camp that I missed out on, I didn't even realize how much I liked Michael Jackson until he passed away and I was listening to all his music and all those memories were flooding in. I thought I was avoiding his music and only listening to Prince, but I was like, I know every single song. So I just think it's important. Obviously, when you're dealing with a narrative where the other camp, so to speak, the things that they believe in and support are detrimental to your being and your rights as a human being, I understand completely not, having as much leeway with people like that. It's understandable,
But I think you should be careful with that in making sure, you're evaluating. Are you evaluating the entire group?
Yeah.
Or are you evaluating the loudest and the most extreme of the group?
Great point. Yeah.
Because we do have a habit of, we'll see a YouTube video or an Instagram short from from someone from the other group and saying, see, this is why I don't like these people.
Right.
But there's plenty of people on the other side, because a lot of it has to do with different degrees. When you talk about, going back to the Democrat and Republican, if you take the average Democrat and the average Republican and you put them in a room and you talk about what is important to you and your family, you're not going to find that much difference. In some cases, you're not going to find any difference. And so I think we have to be careful as that we're not attacking, a straw man, that we're not attacking a caricature of the group that we're against. Another way that I saw this, and this is pretty ridiculous, but anyone who's from what we would call the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, knows this very well. I went to high school in Columbia, Maryland, and Columbia is between DC and Baltimore. And you have people who are from the DC area and people are from the Baltimore area. I think the two cities are about 40 miles apart. That's it. But if you're closer to DC or you're closer to Baltimore, people really do not like each other. And if you look at the distance, it just sounds really ridiculous. It's not like they do something that's that different. Now, you can say that people in Baltimore, they do talk a little bit different than people from DC. And some of the music that they listen to in Baltimore is definitely different than the go-go of DC. So, but it's just the fact that people who live pretty much 40 miles away from each other can have that level of I wouldn't call it hatred, but that level of dislike for each other. And they're the same people. Most of them are still living in Maryland. They're just living in different parts of Maryland. Right. Which is it's absolutely ridiculous.
Right. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when, how you stereotype or make blanket statements about the group you're not in. But I also think it's really important to be aware of the group that you are in. Yeah. Some people go hard for the cause because of one part of it that they relate to, but they're not looking at the entire group or the history of what has happened or what is being done, or really having knowledge about it. And you're standing there shouting and screaming and trying to lift the voices of sometimes some really bad people. And for the sake of, I don't know, there's one piece that you relate to. And I think we need to be really careful about that.
Yes.
That's where we get all the propaganda and, the false, narratives going.
Yes.
I think we need to be careful about what we share and at least maybe add a disclaimer to it. If, especially if you're sharing someone else's view, in memes and things like that, and you're not adding, your piece to it, then you're creating people to stereotype you in the group that you're coming from. I think we all just have a responsibility for how we look at the out group and then also how we hype up the in group.
Yes.
The group that we're in.
And not being afraid to jump out of your group sometimes.
Right.
Saying, hey, guys, I'm with you on this piece here, but in this piece here, it's too much. I'm gonna let you guys go it alone on this one.
Right.
And that's one of the things that, being a critical thinker, being, more mature, you have to start looking at is that even though you may associate with a group, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that people in that group say.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's important to teach kids. As myself as a teacher, teaching them that some people they gasp when they hear about some of the conversations I allow the students to have, but they're developing their critical thinking skills. They don't all have to sit in there and agree, on the same topic or feel the same way, and to allow them to express themselves and still be friends at the end, which kids have a little bit of an easier time doing, is really important. And also shedding light sometimes on their own beliefs
Yeah.
Just having them think a different way about something. I mean, I've had just amazing moments like that. And I know that there's people around the country and it is a small group, even though it seems like it's a big group that's trying to have those discussions stop.
Yeah.
You know, kids, and I'm talking about anything that has to do with anything and everything, honestly. They just want kids reading, you know, See Jane Run. But there's so much more out there, and allowing them to express and hear different views and take away things from it and form new ideas. Maybe some people are scared of that.
Yes.
Forming new ideas, but that's what critical thinking allows you to do.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I don't like really putting books out there as the stuff that we need to read, but there's a gentleman, Michael Shermer, who has a book out there called Giving the Devil Its Due. And it's a fantastic book because he argues both sides of major issues. And the value of that, if you can think the way the people on the other side, if you can steel man the other side. And what I mean by steel man, for those who haven't heard of that, if people have heard of straw manning, where you caricature the other side and then you attack that caricature, steel manning is where you really try to empathize. Doesn't mean you agree, but try to express what someone is saying in a way that that person would actually agree with you. And so sometimes when Tiffany and I are arguing, I'll stop and I'll say, so if I hear you clearly, what you're saying is, and what it is I'm trying to make sure that I fully understand what you're saying.
Right.
And that way, if I'm missing something, you can always add that in. But what it does is it makes it more difficult to vilify someone that you understand. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with them, but it's really hard to vilify someone that you understand, at least.
Right. I think we've done this at the dinner table.
Yes.
With Joseph, where we did the steel man and the straw man to each other, like all of us did it. And that was a really interesting task. I would like to offer that to you out there, to do that with your friends, family. It's humbling, I feel like.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, because I've found that when I do it, it forces me to reevaluate my side of it. And it forces me to, it softens my stance on the other side. Even though I may still think they're wrong, it softens my stance, because I can say, okay, but at least I understand why you think that way. Even though I still think it's wrong, right. I can kind of understand why you think that way. Right.
And you do it without name calling.
Yes.
And just personalizing the conversation. And it tends to force you to choose your words carefully so that you're understood and that you're understanding the other person, as opposed to just heated yelling, screaming, shouting back and forth, trying to prove your own point.
Yeah, I would issue a challenge to everyone in the audience, as you're going throughout the next few days and you find yourself angry at another group for whatever reason, to just be critical of what you're thinking. Just think about it. Think about the group and how they feel and what they're going through, and try to understand what they're going through. And so in doing so, you may have to actually listen to some of them for more than just 10-second sound bites. You may have to listen to a podcast that lasts a full hour or so to understand them. It doesn't mean you're going to agree, but at least you'll have you can come to an understanding as to why someone feels that way. And that's why I wanted to really get into this week, because, all of the narratives that we end up talking about really do have an in-group, out-group dynamic to it. And so it's kind of important to set the groundwork for the future conversations, because there are things that I'm strongly for or strongly against, but I tried my hardest to at least understand the other side.
Yes. And what I want you to talk to something, when we were talking about this on a different day, you were talking about the term agree to disagree.
Yeah, I really don't like agree to disagree. It's just an easy way out. I think that the more mature we become and the more we want to learn from each other, then we have to really dive into that person's thought process. Explain to me why you feel that way. What about this circumstance? In this circumstance, would you still agree with doing that? And just keep interrogating it until you get a full understanding of how they think, and then steelman it. Make sure you got it right. Hey, if I understand you correctly, you're saying this, and get to the point where that person says, that's right, that's exactly what I think. And what I found in circumstances where I've done that, in the reverse, that person now wants to understand why you think a certain way. Because you're not attacking them, I just want to understand you.
Right.
And so it really kind of makes them more curious. And then you may find them interrogating your thought process. And you may find that even though you may not come together, you may come closer.
Right. Right. Which leads me to say, so many people throw out their opinions and feelings and they don't want anyone to challenge it.
Yes.
But I say, don't do that then.
Right.
If you don't want to be challenged or, question or explain further, maybe not do that.
Yes.
Because people are going to form opinions about you that you may not like.
Yes.
And that's your own doing because you're not willing to explain yourself further.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying people should sit there and argue on and on for days, but to make really big, harsh blanket statements about something and not being, and then it rubs somebody the wrong way who maybe is in or not in your group.
Yes.
And they ask you about it and then you just don't want to explain it, then why bring it up in the first place? Why does everyone feel that they can shout out and say all of these things, sometimes awful,
right,
and not be challenged on them? It's just that's not good. Not being a very good human.
It's not. And I also want to talk about the way the attacks can come through. You talked about you didn't say the term, but the ad hominem attack is where you say, oh, you're just an idiot, or you're a criminal, you should be in jail. You start going after the person. I enjoy a vigorous attack on my ideas. If you want to say my idea is stupid, that's okay. Mm-hmm. You haven't hurt my feelings. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, my idea might be stupid. You may be able to prove yourself correct. But when you start going after the person, what it does is it shuts down the conversation.
Right.
But I think that there's nothing wrong with attacking an idea. Mm-hmm. I just think that you want to do it without attacking the person who put out the idea.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people need to it's hard because I'm a very sensitive person, but not to be so quick to say that someone is against you,
right,
hates you, doesn't like you, doesn't agree with you, thinks you're whatever, go on and on and on. If they're communicating in a way that they're talking about the topic and not attacking you, then try to hear that.
Yes.
What you do with it is on you. There, it's up to each person to do their best to communicate in a way that the other person hopefully understands. But at least give yourself that space to have those type of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've found that, with a lot of these people who disagree, we're not as different as people think we are. Or we may strenuously disagree on this one point, but then we may have another 99 points where we're in absolute agreement.
Right.
And so which one is more important? Is it that critical that you bring that person around to your thought process on this one issue when you may agree with them on all the rest of them? Is it really that important? You have to ask yourself, what is wrong with putting your opinion up there for scrutiny? Not putting it up there just so you can say, hey, this is who I am and this is the way I talk, but But putting your opinion up there like we do right now, we're putting our opinions out there for scrutiny.
Right.
For someone to say, hey, I agree with you here, but I think you're way wrong on this. Love it. Let's have the conversation.
Right. And not everyone has to be so open. I understand some people, I'm not talking about this, I'm not talking about that. I'm not going to cover, this subject, which I think in the last probably 6 years, a lot came out about your friends and family that you didn't know because you weren't having certain conversations.
Yes.
And there is friendships lost and family members that don't speak to each other. And, I don't know that while I don't think it's everyone's responsibility to have a conversation about everything, you should at least be doing it to the people who are closest to you.
Yes.
You don't want to have just these, relationships that are very surface level, but also you think what you think and feel in the camp, so to speak, that you belong to doesn't come out because you don't say it.
Right.
It definitely comes out. It comes out in the things you don't say. It comes out in your expressions.
Yeah.
It comes out in other ways, what you support, what you don't support, who you hang around with, who you don't hang around with, who you're open to, what you're not open to. It comes out anyway.
Yes.
So I would rather be represented by what you heard me say than just what you think I'm all about. I mean, and again, you don't have to explain this to everyone, but I feel like if you're in close proximity to someone all the time, why wouldn't you have these important conversations? They impact our lives.
Yes.
We all share this planet, and it's important to have these conversations. And sometimes they're tough, but the more that you have conversations with the group that you're not in, the easier it gets, and you kind of end up coming together. But without those conversations, you're definitely going to stay in different pockets.
Yes. Yes. And Tiffany and I talk about everything, and we have a lot of vigorous discussions, but in the grand scheme of things, we still can't agree on the desserts we like. We just, she likes these kind of simpleton type desserts, chocolate, vanilla ice cream with a cookie, and I want everything. I want the caramel, I want the fudge. If I'm gonna go for it, I want to go for it. I want a little, I like my key lime pie, my cheek. I like a lot of things, a lot of sweet, decadent goodness in a bowl or on the plate. And we have had this discussion ad nauseum, and we just can't seem to come together on it.
No, we can't. So we just get our own desserts. I might try his, he might try mine, and that's okay. We can have different desserts in the same household.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying I can do that on every topic. Let me be clear right here and now. There are certain things that would not fly if I felt he or anyone else was just way off base with human rights and all of that stuff. But I do have some more understanding about gray areas and looking at other perspectives now. So it makes it softens it. But there's still some core things where I'm like, I'm still hard on.
And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. But you still have to think about who the other side is and what could be their reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they've got good reasons, sometimes they have bad reasons, but let's find those reasons. Let's discuss the reasons without discussing the person and trying to put the person down. That's where I think the value is.
Right. And this whole idea of canceling someone because they disagree with you. That's who I was. Not canceling someone because they disagree with me, but when the whole Dr. Seuss thing was coming out about his racism, I was like, that's it. I'm taking all the Dr. Seuss books out of my classroom. And while I told my students, I told them, about what I'd learned. And I said, you make your own decision about the book, right? The book is still available in the school library and libraries everywhere and bookstores, but I just wasn't going to have it in my classroom because the way I felt. And they really understood that. They would still go check out the book at the library. Some of them would and some of them wouldn't. They made their own decisions. And that was the end of it. We didn't go back and forth, and I didn't spend time trying to badger them. But then and I don't know if this is 100% true, but I was hearing that he was apologizing and that he changed his ways after a while. And, Dr. Seuss that was the first book I learned to read was Green Eggs and Ham, and I still have it, right? So that was hard for me. I think because it hit me so hard, because those are the books that I loved and I grew up, reading as my first books that I read. It was really hard for me to support him in the beginning. So I say this to say that you can also change your mind on something that you felt really strongly about, but you can really only do that if you're open to listen to the other side.
That's true.
I could have just stayed shut. I'm not saying I have Dr. Seuss books all back in my classroom. I don't, but I don't feel exactly the way I did before. And what it led me to do is when I am talking to kids about someone who is a hero is making sure that I'm reminding them that there's two sides. Like, this person was really good in this area, but in this area, they weren't. And this is what they did. No one is perfect. And being able to bring those things up, I think, is really important, and not stick to the fact that I want to believe that so-and-so is a hero. And I don't want to hear about the negative things that they've done. That just causes ignorance and misplaced judgment. I think it's important to be able to talk about the in and out, the good and the bad, and then evaluate from there.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we'll discuss more over the narratives podcasts that we do is really about, and, getting into this person may be bad and there are good things that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if, while we're going through the next few weeks here, if any of you can think of in your head, situations where you said, this person who's this evil person, and they did something great that really benefited humanity. See if you can come up with a few of those, and it'll be interesting. We can compare notes. But I wanted to start to wrap this up. Tiffany, did you have any final thoughts?
Just be cognizant of the group you're in and know a little bit about the group you're not in.
Yes.
And just stay critical in your thought process, and being open to the group that you're in, acknowledging that everything about them, there might be some things that are legitimate critiques, and that doesn't mean that they aren't still great, doesn't mean that you aren't still great, but you do need to take that into consideration when you're supporting or not supporting someone.
That's perfect. And as we close this episode of Love, Growth, and Narratives, again, we really appreciate everyone who has followed us and given us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, or the few people that listen to their podcasts on Audible, on Amazon, as well as on YouTube, where we have an audio version of the podcast on YouTube. So we really appreciate it, and we want to keep the discussion going. So if anywhere you think that we're off, or if you want to praise what we do, we would love to hear from you on our social media, as well as within the podcasts themselves. So until next time,
I'm Tiffany signing off.
And I'm Freddie, and thank you so much for your time. We definitely value it. Take care.